Lisa thought she had everything figured out. She was 32 years old, working at a good job in the city, and had been married to Tom for 7 years. From the outside, everything looked perfect. They had a nice house with a small garden, went on trips twice a year, and their social media was full of happy pictures. Her friends would often say how lucky she was, but something had changed over the years, so slowly that Lisa didn't even notice it happening. It was like watching a sunset. You don't see the exact moment when day turns to night, but suddenly you realize you're sitting in darkness. Tom had always been confident and outgoing. That's what attracted her to him in the first place. But somewhere along the way, his confidence had turned into something else. He started making small comments about her clothes. "Are you really wearing that to dinner?" he'd ask, with a slight smile that made her question herself. Then came the questions about her day, but not in a caring way. More like an interrogation. Where did she go? Who did she talk to? Why did she take so long at the grocery store? Lisa found herself explaining everything, even things that didn't need explaining. She stopped meeting friends for coffee because it was easier than dealing with the questions afterward. She turned down after-work gatherings because Tom would get upset if she came home late. She told herself she was just being a good wife, putting her marriage first. One Tuesday evening, everything became clear in the worst possible way. Lisa's company had a dinner celebration because they'd landed a major client. She had worked on the project for months, and her boss wanted the whole team there. She told Tom about it a week in advance. He said it was fine, but she could tell from his tone that it wasn't really fine. At the dinner, her colleague Mike congratulated her on the presentation she'd given to the client. "You really nailed it, Lisa. That was impressive work," he said, just being friendly and professional. She thanked him and didn't think much of it. But someone from the office had posted a group photo online, and Tom saw it before Lisa even got home. She walked through the front door around 9:30, tired but happy. The moment she saw Tom's face, her stomach dropped. He was standing in the living room, his phone in his hand, and the look in his eyes made her nervous. "So you had fun tonight?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "It was nice, yes. The dinner was good, and everyone was happy about the project," she replied, trying to keep her voice normal. "I saw the photo. You were sitting pretty close to Mike, weren't you?" Lisa's heart started beating faster. "We were just sitting at the same table. There were 8 people there, but Tom wasn't listening. His voice got louder with each sentence. He started saying things that didn't make sense, accusing her of things that never happened. He brought up every tiny thing from the past weeks. How she had smiled at the mailman. How she had taken an extra 15 minutes at the store. How she had laughed at something on her phone. Lisa tried to explain. Tried to calm him down. But nothing worked. For the first time in their marriage, she felt actually scared. Not just uncomfortable or sad, but genuinely frightened. Without even realizing it, she started backing away from him. One step, then another, then another. She kept backing up until her shoulders hit the wall behind her. The cool, hard surface stopped her retreat. She stood there, pressed against the wall in her own bedroom, and something inside her brain clicked into place like a light switch being flipped. This was her house, her bedroom, and she was backed against the wall, afraid of her own husband. In that single moment, standing there with nowhere left to go, Lisa saw everything clearly for the first time in years. She had been backing away for so long, backing away from friends, from hobbies she loved, from her own opinions and choices. She had been making herself smaller and smaller, trying to take up less space in her own life. The wall behind her back became more than just plaster and paint. It was the end of the line. She couldn't back up anymore. There was nowhere left to retreat to, and standing there in that quiet, terrible moment, Lisa realized that she had only 2 choices left. Stay pressed against this wall forever, or find the courage to move forward, even if it meant everything would change. The next morning, Lisa woke up before Tom. She lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, and the events of the previous night played through her mind like a movie she couldn't stop watching. Her whole body felt heavy, like she was carrying bags of sand on her shoulders. She got up quietly and went to the bathroom. Looking at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. When had she started looking so tired? When had those lines appeared around her eyes? More importantly, when had she started being afraid in her own home? Tom acted like nothing had happened. He came down for breakfast, kissed her on the cheek, and asked what she wanted to do that weekend. It was so normal, so casual, that Lisa started wondering if maybe she had overreacted. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe she was being too sensitive. But then she remembered the wall against her back, and she knew she wasn't wrong. At work that day, Lisa couldn't concentrate. She kept thinking about the night before, and the more she thought about it, the more other memories came flooding back. Times when Tom had made her feel small. Times when he had questioned everything she did. Times when she had changed her plans just to avoid upsetting him. During her lunch break, she did something she had never done before. She sat in her car and searched on her phone. How do you know if your relationship is unhealthy? The articles that came up made her hands shake. It was like reading her own diary. Written by strangers. Control over finances. Yes. Tom handled all their money and gave her an allowance, even though she worked full-time. Isolation from friends and family. Yes. She rarely saw anyone anymore. Constant criticism disguised as jokes or concern. Yes, almost every day. Making her question her own judgment and reality. Yes, she always felt confused about what was real and what wasn't. There was a word that kept appearing in the articles, but Lisa couldn't bring herself to apply it to her situation. Not yet. That word was for other people. People in situations much worse than hers, wasn't it? That evening, she called her younger sister Jenny, who lived 3 states away. They hadn't talked properly in months, because Tom always found reasons why Lisa was too busy for phone calls. Jen, can I ask you something? Lisa's voice was shaking. Of course. What's wrong? You sound upset. Do you think there's something wrong with my marriage? There was a long pause on the other end. Then Jenny said something that broke through all of Lisa's defenses. Lisa, I've been worried about you for 2 years, but every time I try to talk to you about it, you change the subject or make excuses for him. The tears came then, hot and fast. Lisa told her sister everything, not just about last night, but about all the nights. All the small moments that had added up to this crushing weight on her chest. Jenny didn't judge her. She didn't say, I told you so. She just listened. And then she said, what you're describing isn't love, Lisa. It's control. And you don't have to live like this. After the call, Lisa sat in her car for a long time. She was parked at a grocery store, pretending to shop so she'd have an excuse for being late. She was making excuses even now, she realized. Always explaining, always justifying, always trying to keep the peace. She started looking up information about relationship counselors, but something in her gut told her that counseling wouldn't fix this. You can't counsel someone into respecting you. You can't therapy your way out of being controlled. Instead, she found a number for a helpline. She stared at it for 10 minutes before finally calling. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The woman who answered was kind and patient. She didn't push Lisa to say anything she wasn't ready to say. She just asked questions and listened to the answers. Do you feel safe at home? The counselor asked. Lisa had never been asked that question before. I'm not in danger, she said carefully. That's not what I asked. I asked if you feel safe, and Lisa realized the answer was no. She didn't feel safe. She felt like she was walking on eggshells every single day, trying not to crack them. The counselor talked to her about making a plan, about small steps she could take, opening her own bank account that Tom didn't know about, keeping important documents somewhere safe, having a bag packed just in case. These suggestions made everything feel very real and very scary. But Lisa did one thing that day. She opened a new email account that Tom didn't have access to. It was a tiny step, but it was something that was just hers, a small secret, a small piece of freedom. Over the next 3 months, Lisa lived 2 completely different lives. At home, she became quieter, more agreeable, More careful, she had learned exactly which topics would set Tom off and which ones were safe. She knew which tone of voice to use, which expressions to wear on her face. It was exhausting, like being an actress in a play that never ended. But during the day, when Tom was at work, Lisa was busy with something else. She was planning her way out. She met with a lawyer during her lunch hour, telling her office she had a dentist appointment. The lawyer was a woman in her 50s who had seen cases like this before. She explained to Lisa what would happen in a separation, how to protect herself financially, what kind of evidence would be helpful. Start documenting everything, the lawyer advised. Keep a journal of incidents. Take screenshots of text messages. Save any emails. I know it feels wrong, like you're betraying him, but you're protecting yourself. Lisa did feel wrong doing it. Even though she knew Tom's behavior wasn't okay, part of her still felt guilty for planning to leave. That's what 3 months of therapy sessions were helping her understand. That the guilt was part of the pattern. Part of how control works. She had found a counselor who specialized in helping people in difficult relationships. Twice a week, during her lunch break, Lisa would sit in her car on video calls and talk about things she'd never said out loud before. The counselor helped her see how it had all happened so gradually. It's like a frog in boiling water, she explained. If you drop a frog in boiling water, it jumps out immediately. But if you put it in cool water and slowly turn up the heat, it doesn't notice until it's too late. That's what happened to you. Lisa started keeping a journal, and reading back over her own words was shocking. She wrote about how Tom had gone through her phone while she was sleeping, about how he'd shown up at her office unexpectedly to take her to lunch, but really to check on her, about how he'd convinced her to quit the gym because he said the membership was too expensive, but really because he didn't like her being somewhere he couldn't monitor. Every small thing, written down in black and white, became impossible to ignore. The hardest part was the money. Tom controlled all their finances. Lisa's paycheck went into their joint account, and Tom gave her a debit card that he monitored. She had to explain every purchase, so opening her own account was risky. She did it anyway. She opened an account at a different bank, one that Tom didn't use. She started having a small portion of her paycheck deposited there. Just $100 each pay period. It wasn't much, but over 3 months, it added up. It was her escape fund. She also started moving important things out of the house, bit by bit. Her birth certificate, her passport, the jewelry her grandmother had left her. She mailed them to Jenny in unmarked packages. Tom never noticed because he never thought Lisa was capable of planning something like this. The counselor had warned her about something important. The most dangerous time is when you actually leave, she said. That's when someone who's been controlling loses their control, and they can become unpredictable. You need a safety plan, so Lisa made one. She told 2 people at work, her boss and her closest colleague, what was happening. Not all the details, but enough that they would notice if something was wrong. She bought a prepaid phone and hid it in her gym bag that she kept in her car. She memorized Jenny's number and the number for emergency services. She picked a date to leave. Tom had a work conference coming up in 3 months. A 3-day trip to another city. That would be her window. 3 days to get out, get settled somewhere, and file the papers before he got back. Every night, Lisa would lie in bed next to Tom, and her mind would race. Sometimes, she wondered if she was doing the right thing. Maybe she should try harder. Maybe she should give him one more chance. Maybe it wasn't really that bad, but then she would remember the wall. The feeling of her back against that wall, with nowhere left to go. And she knew that if she didn't leave now, she might never leave at all. The waiting was the hardest part. Acting normal while planning to leave. Smiling when she wanted to scream. Pretending everything was fine when everything was falling apart. But Lisa kept going, because she had to. She had spent too long backing away, getting smaller, disappearing into her own life. Now it was time to take up space again. Time to be loud instead of quiet. Time to choose herself, even though it was the scariest thing she'd ever done. The Friday morning that Tom left for his conference, Lisa's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her coffee cup. She had barely slept all week. her mind going over the plan again and again, checking for mistakes, looking for things she'd forgotten. Tom was in a good mood that morning, talking about his presentations at the conference, the people he'd meet, the fancy hotel. He kissed her goodbye at the door, the same way he'd done 1,000 times before. "I'll call you tonight," he said. "Make sure you answer." "I will," Lisa replied, knowing it was the last lie she'd ever tell him. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, Lisa called Jenny. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. "He's gone. I'm doing this today. I'm really doing this." "I'm already at the airport," Jenny said. "I'll be there in 4 hours." "You've got this, Lisa. You're so brave." But Lisa didn't feel brave. She felt terrified. Her whole body was shaking, and she thought she might be sick. She sat on the couch for 10 minutes, just trying to breathe, trying to make her heart slow down. Then she stood up and got to work. She had made lists, organized in her secret email account. Clothes, just enough to fill 2 suitcases. Documents, already at Jenny's house, but she double-checked to make sure. Sentimental items, her mother's cookbook, photos from before she met Tom, a necklace her best friend had given her years ago. She moved through the house like she was following a map. Everything she took, she had decided on weeks ago. She left behind the expensive jewelry Tom had given her, the designer bags, the fancy appliances. They weren't hers. They were things he'd bought to make her look like the kind of wife he wanted, not things she'd chosen for herself. When Jenny arrived, Lisa fell apart for a moment. Seeing her sister, having someone actually there with her, made it all feel real in a way it hadn't before. They hugged in the doorway, and Lisa cried on her shoulder. "It's okay," Jenny kept saying. "You're doing the right thing. It's going to be okay." Together, they loaded Lisa's car. 2 suitcases, 3 boxes, 1 bag of shoes. Everything Lisa owned that actually mattered fit in the back of her car. 7 years of marriage, packed up in 2 hours. Before they left, Lisa walked through the house one last time. Each room held memories, but they weren't happy ones anymore. The kitchen, where Tom would criticize her cooking, the living room where she'd learned to sit quietly while he watched whatever he wanted on TV. The bedroom where she'd hit that wall. She took off her wedding ring and placed it on the kitchen counter. Next to it, she put a note. Her lawyer had helped her write it. Short, clear, no emotion. "I'm safe. I'm ending our marriage. You will hear from my lawyer. Please don't try to contact me." As she pulled out of the driveway for the last time, Lisa felt like she couldn't breathe. This was her house, her neighborhood, her life for 7 years. And she was driving away from all of it, but she kept driving. They went to a shelter in the next city over, a place that helped people in situations like Lisa's. The counselor had given her the address weeks ago. It wasn't fancy, just a simple building with tight security and kind staff members who asked no questions. Lisa was given a small room with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out onto a garden. It wasn't much, but it was hers. No one would yell at her here. No one would question her. No one would make her feel small. That first night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Lisa cried harder than she'd ever cried in her life. All the fear, all the sadness, all the anger she'd been holding in for years came pouring out. She cried for the woman she used to be before she met Tom. She cried for the 7 years she'd lost. She cried for how hard the road ahead would be. But when she finally stopped crying, when she'd run out of tears, something else came. A tiny feeling, barely there, but growing stronger. It was relief. She was out. She had actually done it. She wasn't backed against that wall anymore. Jenny slept on a cot in her room that night, just to be there. When Lisa woke up at 3 a.m. from a nightmare, her sister was awake immediately. "What if I made a mistake?" Lisa whispered in the dark. "What if this was all wrong?" Jenny took her hand. "Do you feel safer here than you did in that house?" Lisa thought about it honestly. "Yes," she admitted. "I do." Then it wasn't a mistake. The first 6 months after Lisa left were the hardest period of her entire life. Tom's reaction was exactly what the counselor had predicted. First came the apologetic messages, dozens of them, promising he'd change, begging her to come back, saying he couldn't live without her. When that didn't work, the messages turned angry. He called her selfish, ungrateful, crazy. He told her she was throwing away their life over nothing. Lisa blocked his number. She blocked him on every social media platform. She communicated only through her lawyer, short professional messages about dividing property and filing papers. Every time she felt tempted to respond, to explain herself, to try to make him understand, she remembered the wall. The feeling of being trapped with nowhere to go. That memory kept her strong. The legal process was exhausting. Tom fought her on everything. The house, the savings, even things that were clearly hers. Her lawyer said it was his last attempt at control, dragging things out to keep her connected to him. But Lisa stood firm. She'd come this far. She wasn't backing down now. After 2 months at the shelter, Lisa found a small apartment. It wasn't in the best neighborhood, and it was tiny compared to the house she'd left, but it was hers. Every single thing in it was her choice. She picked out secondhand furniture, painted the walls a soft blue that Tom would have hated, and filled the windowsills with plants. Money was tight. She was living on just her salary now, with no access to their joint accounts until the legal stuff was sorted out. She ate simple meals, skipped expensive coffees, walked instead of driving when she could. But she'd never felt richer. She could spend $5 without explaining it to anyone. She could buy herself flowers just because she wanted to. She could order pizza at midnight if she felt like it. The therapy sessions continued, now twice a week. Lisa was learning so much about herself. Why she'd been vulnerable to Tom's control. What red flags she'd missed early on. How to trust her own judgment again. Some sessions left her feeling hopeful. Others left her feeling angry at herself for staying so long. "Stop beating yourself up," her therapist would say. "You did the best you could with the information you had at the time. Now you have more information. That's growth, not failure." Lisa reached out to old friends she'd lost touch with over the years. Some didn't respond. Too much time had passed, too many canceled plans, too many excuses. But others welcomed her back with open arms. Her friend Rachel, whom she'd known since college, cried when Lisa finally told her the truth about why she'd disappeared. "I knew something was wrong," Rachel said. "But every time I asked, you said everything was fine. I should have pushed harder." "You couldn't have known," Lisa told her. "I couldn't even admit it to myself." Work became a refuge. Lisa threw herself into her projects, stayed late, volunteered for extra assignments. Her boss noticed the change in her. "You seem different lately," she said one day. "More confident. More willing to speak up in meetings." Lisa realized it was true. For years, she'd made herself smaller everywhere. Not just at home. Tom's voice had been in her head even at work, telling her she wasn't smart enough, wasn't good enough, shouldn't take risks. Now that voice was getting quieter every day. 10 months after leaving, Lisa got promoted. It came with a raise that meant she could move to a better apartment, start saving money again, maybe even take a vacation someday. When her boss told her the news, Lisa actually cried right there in the office, not from sadness, but from joy and relief and pride. The legal stuff finally wrapped up after a year. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon. Lisa sat in the courtroom, watched the judge sign the papers, and felt a weight lift off her shoulders that she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. That evening, she took herself out to dinner. Just her, a good book, and a meal at a restaurant she'd always wanted to try. She ordered exactly what she wanted without worrying about someone's opinion. She ate slowly, enjoying every bite, and when she left, walking back to her car in the dark, she wasn't afraid. She was free. Lisa still thought about Tom sometimes, not with longing, but with a kind of sad understanding. She hoped he'd get help, figure out why he needed to control people, maybe treat the next person better. But that wasn't her responsibility anymore. Her only responsibility was to herself. A year and a half after leaving, Lisa stood in her new apartment, a nicer place in a better neighborhood. with big windows and good light. She'd decorated it exactly how she wanted. There were plants everywhere, colorful paintings on the walls, books scattered on every surface. It was messy and bright, and completely, wonderfully hers. Sometimes she'd think back to that night when her back hit the wall, when she had nowhere left to retreat. That wall had saved her life by forcing her to see the truth. She couldn't go backward anymore, so she had to go forward, even though it was terrifying. Now, when things got hard or scary or uncertain, Lisa reminded herself of what she'd already survived. She'd left everything familiar and started over from nothing. She'd stood up to someone who tried to make her small. She'd chosen herself when it would have been easier to stay. The wall had stopped her retreat. But what came after? That was all her own courage, her own strength, her own choice to take up space in the world again. And nobody would ever back her into a corner again, because now Lisa knew something important. She was strong enough to push back, brave enough to walk away, and worthy enough to demand better. She wasn't perfect, and her life wasn't perfect either. But it was real, and it was hers, and that was more than enough.